Ebola fear spreads. Spain, the U.S., and other nations take steps to protect against the deadly virus. Religious liberty in prison. The Supreme Court hears an unusual case with major implications. Frankly speaking, an Australian couple tells the Vatican Synod how marriage is messy. And extra padding. The parents who lost their son to a football injury help protect other young players. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 7th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. U.S. health experts say there is progress in the battle to stem West Africa's Ebola outbreak, but the fight is far from over, with more potential cases surfacing in other parts of the world. Wyatt Goolsby joins us tonight with the very latest. Wyatt?
Brian, health officials in Europe are scrambling to try and figure out how the Ebola virus could be spreading inside Spain's capital. Authorities there say they are monitoring 3 more potential cases of Ebola. That comes one day after a nurse's assistant became the first person known to have caught Ebola outside of Africa in the current outbreak. The Madrid hospital where the patients are being treated is quarantining all potential cases, saying they'll even euthanize the woman's pet dog as a precaution. That nurse's assistant treated 2 Spanish priests who returned home for treatment after getting the virus while serving in West Africa. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., medical officials are retraining hospital staff after the mishandling of a critically ill Liberian man in Texas. That man, Thomas Eric Duncan, could have exposed others to the virus after initially being sent away by a hospital. We know tonight he is showing improved liver function, though he remains in critical condition in a Dallas hospital. Today, the head of the Centers for Disease Control talked about what is being done to track down anyone who could have come in contact with Ebola.
In Dallas, there are 10 definite and 38 possible contacts being monitored. Each and every one of them is having their temperature monitored. As of today, none of them are sick, none of them has a fever. We'll continue to watch that very closely in the coming days.
U.S. troops are providing training and resources to Africa as part of a broader U.S. government effort. The Army general who commands U.S. troops in Africa says the efforts against the Ebola crisis in Liberia are expected to cost $750 million over 6 months. He says most of the 4,000 military personnel will not come in direct contact with sick patients, but some will help directly in treating patients. U.S. health officials say they will consider increased screening options, but not ban flights from afflicted countries. The current Ebola outbreak has killed more than 3,400 people in West Africa so far. Brian?
Thanks, Wyatt. Global health law expert Ana Ayala is with us from Georgetown's O'Neill Institute. Now, you've written that nations can only be so effective without a law in place in this fight against Ebola. What do you mean by that?
That is right. Basically, using the law can add a lot of tools, basically, to combat things like what we're seeing right now. So, for example, the International Health Regulations is a legal instrument that was ratified by 196 countries. The WHO basically would heads a surveillance and response system under this International Health Regulations. And this particular instrument basically obligates countries to actually build the core capacities, as we call them, in terms of trying to respond to things like Ebola, being able to conduct enough surveillance in order to detect any cases that may come about that raise that type of danger for populations.
So this problem really is a perfect example of why we need international health law.
Exactly. And not only that, what it does is that it actually, part of the obligations that countries have under the IHR, as we call them, is to set up national legislation in order to make sure that the country is well prepared for this kind of thing.
So how can the U.S. best collaborate with other nations in this effort? We really have to do that now, right?
Yes, the U.S., other countries that have the resources in order to help West Africa, and hopefully not other countries that may be affected by this as well. But in terms of providing enough protective equipment, in making sure that there are enough healthcare workers that are able to treat patients, that you build enough hospitals, exactly what they're doing right now, but just really making sure that we're tackling this in an effective manner.
There's so much fear surrounding this, and even here in the United States. Can you talk very briefly about our medical infrastructure compared with, say, that in West Africa, where this is out of control? Is it really possible to control this in the U.S.?
Well, it is expected that because the U.S. has a pretty strong healthcare system, that they will be able to contain the Ebola in the United States. You compare that to the public health infrastructures in these countries in West Africa that are coming out of civil wars or are just living in extreme poverty, that you can really see, and what we're seeing right now in terms of how far it has spread and the number of people that it has killed and infected, that their system, their healthcare systems are not prepared to deal with these kind of things.
Did the World Health Organization wait too long before declaring this a public health emergency? If so, what was the consequence of that?
Unfortunately, I would say that yes, the Ebola epidemic could have been declared an international emergency some time long before they actually did. But a lot has to do also with the amount of resources that WHO counts or has. The budget is very limited, and really, in order to prevent these things from happening again, we want to make sure that the world does invest in public health infrastructure building. We cannot just deal with it in this sort of reactionary basis, but rather really invest in making sure that countries are well prepared. All countries are well prepared to deal with these type of diseases, because any risk that happens in any of these countries is a risk to the rest of the world as well.
Very insightful. Ana Ayala, Georgetown's O'Neill Institute, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The stock market closed sharply lower today as investors worry about global economic growth slowing down. The Dow dropped 272 points, or 1.6%. It closed at 16,719. The S&P 500 fell 29 points. That's about 1.5% drop. The NASDAQ lost about 70 points. Investors reacting to the International Monetary Fund cutting its global growth outlook for this year and next. That, coupled with other poor financial news today, sent stocks sliding. Twitter is suing the U.S. government over its surveillance tactics. The internet company filed the suit today in a California federal court. At issue, Twitter receives requests from the government about users' activities, but the company isn't allowed to disclose how many requests it gets or what types of requests. The tech firm says it wants to be more transparent with its users. In the past, though, the government has resisted releasing details about its information gathering from tech firms. The reason cited? National security. 4 senior executives at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs are being fired. The allegations against these executives include neglect of duty, data manipulation, and conduct unbecoming a senior executive. These firings come as the VA investigates long wait times for treatment and alleged cover-ups of delays at their medical facilities. 4 suspected Islamic terrorists, all in their early 20s, are in custody after several raids in London. Homes and cars in the British capital are being searched as part of this investigation. The terror threat in the UK was recently raised to severe. That's because of an increase in the number of British citizens traveling to Syria to join Islamic State fighters. The British government warns the terrorist group plans to strike targets in Great Britain. Well, U.S.-led airstrikes may not be enough to stop Islamic State militants from capturing a key town on Syria's border with Turkey. Catherine Elliott updates the battle at the border.
The black flag from the Islamic State militant group still flies on the outskirts of Kobani, a Syrian town just south of the border with Turkey. And if the Turkish president's assessment is correct, the town is about to fall. Outgunned Kurdish forces are struggling to repel extremists with limited aid from U.S.-led coalition airstrikes. Islamic State fighters using tanks and heavy weapons have been pounding Kurdish forces in the strategic town for days. Speaking to refugees at a Syrian camp, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the coalition airstrikes would not be enough to halt the militants and called for greater cooperation with the Syrian moderate opposition. Turkish tanks and other ground forces have been stationed yards from the fighting in Kobani, but have not intervened. Across the border for Syrians, the waiting is hard to take. Turkish police used water cannons and tear gas against demonstrators protesting against the Islamic State group's advance on Kobani. The protests were not isolated to the Turkish-Syria border alone. Across Europe, activists are demanding more help for the Kurdish forces struggling to hold on to Kobani. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, thank you, Catherine. The Supreme Court hears arguments today in its first religious liberty case since the Hobby Lobby ruling. It involves a Muslim inmate's claim that his religious beliefs require him to grow a beard. Jason Calvi was in the courtroom today. He reports from the High Court tonight. Jason?
Brian, Arkansas prison policy bans inmates from wearing a beard. Now, there are exceptions for those who have a medical condition, but there's no exceptions for those who want to grow a beard for religious reasons. So now one inmate is challenging that policy.
A prisoner's handwritten plea to the U.S. Supreme Court is taken up today. Gregory Holt, also known as Abdul Malik Muhammad, is serving a life sentence for a brutal attack on his ex-girlfriend. He says his Muslim faith requires him to grow a beard, and he says he has the right to do so. The Arkansas Department of Corrections bans the beard, saying it's a safety concern. The state says an inmate could shave his beard to disguise himself during an escape or hide contraband in it. Law professor Douglas Laycock, who argued the case on behalf of Holt, says that's not possible.
43 states permit prisoners to wear beards. Our guy's only asking for half an inch. It's really preposterous to think he could hide anything in a half-inch beard.
But Arkansas's Deputy Attorney General disagreed, saying something as small as a SIM card could be hidden in facial hair. He also said, prisoners are capable of doing a lot of mischief in prison. We have assaults in the wrong barracks because correctional officers get beaten. Congress passed a law in 2000 aimed at protecting prisoners' religious rights, unless there's strong reason for the limits and they're imposed in the least restrictive way. Former convict Jesse Weiss supports Holt. He spent 8 years in prison and says practicing his religion in prison played a key role in his life.
The things that I was able to learn, leadership, conflict resolution, multitude of things that I was able to learn, good citizenship qualities that I was able to learn while I was in prison.
And so Weiss, along with the Obama administration and groups representing many religions, Jews, Muslims, Christians, all coming together to file briefs on behalf of this inmate. And Brian, the decision is expected right here, the Supreme Court, in the spring. Back to you.
Right. Fascinating story. Thank you, Jason, at the Supreme Court. Dr. Sayyid Syeed is the National Director of the Islamic Society of North America. What is the Muslim teaching on the beard for men?
There is no commandment in the Quran. It's not that kind of obligation, but it has come to associate itself with Muslims. Majority of Muslims do have beards. So
he's not required?
It's not required.
It isn't. And do you think that Arkansas's prison grooming policy would violate this person's individual beliefs, even though it's not a strict requirement?
Right. I mean, you have to look at this from his point of view. He believes that it is a requirement for him in order to be a good Muslim. So that's why, I mean, all of us thought that if there is a possibility of religious accommodation, then we should encourage that.
Yeah, it might be similar to a Catholic perhaps wearing rosary beads or a miraculous medal, something that we feel is very important to us.
Yeah.
Can you sympathize at all, though, with the prison security concerns there?
We have sympathy with both sides, in a sense. On the one hand, I mean, naturally, you want to make sure that this kind of concession is not exploited, as the local prison officials are saying. But at the same time, you know that here you have someone who has internalized a certain religious identity, and he's very particular about it. So that's where we, all of us work together, Catholics, Muslims, Jews. We have made sure that in this country that religion is given a respectable role. That's why we had to make go an extra mile for this RLUIPA, that is this religious accommodation. You don't see it in many other countries. I mean, we have a problem in France, for example, when a Muslim girl with a hijab goes in a college or in a religious, in an official building, she's not allowed to go.
Yeah. And some Christian clerics are not allowed to wear their collars and that sort of thing. So I guess this is really about religious liberty. With what violates the religious liberty of one violates the religious liberty of all. You've been in dialogue with the Vatican about this. Why do you think people of all faiths should pay attention to what the court is doing here?
That's very true, because I mean, just like we are together condemning these terrorist activities and just brutal killings in different parts of the world, so we have to make sure that here in our own country, that people with faith, people who have, adopted a faith or living a certain faith, we make sure together, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, that there is that kind of accommodation. And we have succeeded in many, many ways.
And do you think this case and others like it will solidify that effort?
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah,
because it gives a sense of pride that he is part of a religious landscape where his religion is respected and he is given that kind of freedom, even though sometimes we have to go an extra mile by creating that accommodation. So that's amazing. That's what America is.
Mm-hmm. We'll see what the High Court does. The Islamic Society of North America's Dr. Sayyid Syeed, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Coming up, we take you to Rome, where bishops hear from an Australian couple about the messiness of marriage. On Tuesday, October 7th, thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Bishops from around the world and some lay Catholics wrapped up a second day of meetings on the family at the Vatican today. For the first time, a married couple addressed the group yesterday on the ups and downs of married life. Alan Holdren joins us from Rome tonight. And Alan, tell us a little about this couple and what they said.
So this was a married couple from Australia, Brian. They've been married for 55 years. They've got 4 children. And they spoke about their experience of life and marriage in their parish as being messy. They spoke of a couple of examples from parish life. A woman in the parish who's divorced, who brings her children to Mass every Sunday despite certain discomfort. And also another couple who has a son who is gay, who invited his partner to go on a family vacation. And the parents said yes, saying that they have to show God's love in every situation. These are just some of the examples that have come up in a synod, these meetings, that is attempting to get into society and understand where the family is today. And this is what the Pope wanted. He wants the whole picture, including broken families.
And the word synod can be a little intimidating. Just tell us how a synod works.
Well, this synod includes about 250 participants. 190 of these are bishops. Others include these married couples like the Australians. An American couple spoke to the synod just this afternoon. Now, the Pope is present. He's listening in on all of these discussions as a listener, really. He did give the opening speech, but that's been it for this until this point. Now, he's going to be collecting up all this information, and it will guide him as he prepares for next year's synod on the same theme, where he's going to be having to make some concrete decisions on how to treat families and care for families today. Brian?
All right, thanks, Alan. About 40 of the synod participants are from Africa. Pastoral concerns there range from poverty to polygamy. Alan talked with a Nigerian bishop who says the goals of Africans for family life aren't much different than ours.
We just want a normal family in line with the biblical concept of family, man and woman together in stable union, and they, bring up children. If God gives them children, they, are in communion. This is what we want to see in a family.
The Synod on the Family continues until October the 19th. Well, 2015 is shaping up to be a very busy travel year for Pope Francis. The Vatican announced today the 77-year-old pontiff will make an official state visit to France next year. He's already set to go to Sri Lanka and the Philippines in January. A trip to the U.S. is expected next September. Later this year, the Holy Father will be in Strasbourg to address the European Parliament, and he'll be going to Turkey just a few days later. The commission set up by Pope Francis to protect children from sexual abuse is making some progress. One commissioner told an Associated Press reporter that statutes defining the scope of the commission's work have now been drawn up. Pope Francis must still approve them, as well as a list of 9 new expert candidates. They include experts from other fields and another abuse survivor. The existing members have divided into working groups. Some will reach out to abuse survivors, offering them care and a chance to give input. Others will focus on holding bishops accountable, keeping the priesthood free of pedophiles. Well, the inventors behind a little lighting device that's had a big impact on our world win the Nobel Prize in Physics. 2 of the scientists are from Japan, 1 from the U.S. Their work transformed lighting technology. It paved the way for LED lights. They illuminate everything from computer screens to smartphones. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences says the 3 scientists succeeded where everyone else had failed. The American winner is a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Up next, a couple works to protect young football players after their son takes a fatal hit on the field. And hands-free communication systems in some new cars seem to be creating even more driver distraction. It's Tuesday, October 7th, and you're with EWTN News Nightly. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell meets with team owners in New York tomorrow. The league's updated policy on personal conduct is likely to top the agenda of that meeting. He's taking heat for his handling of the domestic violence charges against former Baltimore running back Ray Rice. Several other high-profile NFL players have also been accused of domestic violence in recent months. Well, his motto was, "Don't quit, never give up." Now, the parents of a Florida teen are turning their son's death into an effort to protect other young football players. Our Catherine Zeltner shares their story.
The play that killed Knightsville High School wide receiver Taylor Haugen is one that happens in nearly every game at every level.
He went out for a cross route and jumped up in the air to catch the pass. He was tackled from the front and back.
The 15-year-old staggered to the sidelines and collapsed. He died hours later.
It crushed his liver, and the surgeons that worked on him did compare it to a high-speed car crash.
Hoping to prevent further tragedies on the field, the Haugens created a foundation named after their son. Its Youth Equipment for Sports and Safety program gives high school teams nationwide protective padding.
We provide teams the opportunity to get the shirts at half the price of the retail price with a video tape that explains exactly how the shirts work, how the pads work.
While brain, spinal cord, and heat-related injuries have received significant attention in football, torso injuries are often overlooked and unreported.
But a lot of things that happen in the torso region, when somebody gets a bruise or contusion or something happen, we kind of ignore it. We don't report it. We don't think about it. We don't. We wouldn't say that it had the same type of attention.
Are you ready? But no matter what, the Haugens do not want kids to quit playing the sport their son loved.
He would want us to not give up on the sport. He loved it that much, and we did too.
They just hope to make the game safer.
Yes, my mom actually, she wants me to wear it every time I step on the field, actually.
Something that is starting to catch on. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. Something so powerful out of something so painful. Well, convenience might not always be a good thing when it comes to some new cars. That's according to new research on the hands-free systems installed in many newer cars. While voice commands are supposed to help keep the driver focused on the road, many are doing just the opposite. Poor user interfaces and confusing commands are big problems with these new systems. Chevy's MyLink system had the worst rating. Toyota's Entune was rated the best interface, causing very little driver distraction. The study was sponsored by AAA and conducted by the University of Utah. Well, for the first time in over a year, astronauts ventured outside the International Space Station today. The spacewalk was a maintenance mission. American Reed Wiseman and German Alexander Gerst put a broken pump about the size of a refrigerator into storage. Spacewalks were put on hold last July after an Italian astronaut's helmet flooded. NASA was able to eventually fix that problem, leading to today's spacewalk with some pretty awesome views. Well, thank you for being our viewers tonight. Until tomorrow, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. If you'd like to watch again, you can do that on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, our entire team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night and God bless you.